Hi, welcome to the Unearthing Autism Podcast. I'm Jay Beard.
And I'm Morgan Sumrell.
We're some self-diagnosed folks in Winter Park, Orlando, Florida. And I'll start saying in the beginning that we have a Discord server that you can find the link to in the description. So today's episode is what to do if you think you're autistic. So we're going to go over what that means to realize you're autistic, go over the pros and cons of diagnosis, talk about disclosing, and end with talking about unmasking. So as for so I guess the first thing I'll say is if you think you're autistic, there's not necessarily anything you have to do. The point is for you to realize and to help understand yourself and your relationship to other people. And so I wanted to explain this idea of neurodiversity so that people can understand, kind of frame autism, kind of the new understanding of it. So neurodiversity says that that something like autism is natural variations in the brain and isn't necessarily a disease that needs to be cured. So I thought of a good analogy. If you think of like ants, they all rely on each other, and there's different types of ants. There's like worker ants. There's the fighting ants.
The ones like with the really big head.
Exactly, yeah. There's different types of ants, and they fulfill different functions. And that's kind of how humanity is. We're not all cookie cutters of the same person. We are very different. Some people are short, some people are tall, some people are good at some things, some people are good at other things. And so autism evolved through natural selection to fill a particular niche. And I imagine we fill many niches, but clearly autism has arrived, has been a benefit to humanity, and it's helped with things like innovation and things like art. And what do you think?
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, so the point is that if you realize you're autistic, you're not broken, maybe you don't have the best relationship with yourself. So realizing that you're autistic can just help frame your traits as they're supposed to be there, and it helps to accept them. So let's talk about the pros and cons of diagnosis. What are some pros for getting diagnosed?
If you're somebody who needs accommodations, like at work or like things like that, you'd be able to get them, and you can't get them if you're just self-diagnosed. Yes.
Yeah, and the basic big help of getting diagnosed is to know for sure. However,
self-validation.
Yeah, so you don't have imposter syndrome. I will mention that the whole idea of needing diagnosis is a little bit in this framework of autism being a disease or a mental illness. If you don't see it as a mental illness, if you see it as just a natural variation and you're doing well in life, then you don't need to see a doctor necessarily. Like, I'm super happy, I don't have something messed up in my life. So for me, this was just a fun thing to realize about myself. And yeah, there's lots of debates over whether autism is a disability or a difference. And basically, it's some sort of both, and it's different things for different people.
There's definitely people that it is disabling in our society. Like, if our society wasn't the way that it is, then people, I think like all people would be able to like thrive and live a happy life, and it wouldn't be like disabling. But because we live in a society where we have to like go to work and pay the bills and go and like socialize with people who don't understand what all different types of people look like and how different people socialize, and everybody doesn't fit into that like cookie cutter like you were talking about, like they would be able to thrive. But because the world is the way that it is, a lot of people need more help and they need those accommodations.
Yes, and part of the reason we're passionate about raising awareness about autism is so that we can help accommodate autistic people, so that you can tell your friends, hey, I'm autistic, that's why I'm sitting on the ground and doing the weird thing, and then they understand and they don't judge you the same way for it. Mm-hmm. And so another big reason you would want to get diagnosed is if you think you have other conditions as well. So I was talking to your ex Basil once, and I said, he said, I really want to get to the bottom. I want to get diagnosed, figure out if I'm autistic. And I said, what is there to figure out? We already talked about this. You were late to speaking, you STEM, you have the full profile. What is there to realize? And he said, well, I think I might have schizophrenia too. And I said, okay, well, then that's a decent reason to go talk to a doctor then.
Yeah, I also think with him specifically, and so I've heard that like narcissistic personality disorder can like be a comorbidity with autism sometimes. And I think that he has like all of that going on. So I think he's got more than just autism to look at with himself, but I think that definitely plays into it.
Yeah, it's interesting how narcissism, it's almost like autism can be confused with narcissism, or it's almost like there's another kind of narcissism that's special to autism. It seems like the usual narcissist can be quite manipulative, while the autistic narcissist won't be so manipulative, but they will be really full of themselves. So, another thing to consider, so with the cons, why you might not want to get diagnosed, the basic big reason is the cost. It costs, I don't know, roughly $700 when I looked into it, and that's a basic reason that I wouldn't want to get diagnosed.
In a lot of places, it's like thousands.
Yeah.
Or at least over 1,000 for most places.
Yeah, you have to wait on a wait list, pay lots of money.
Usually there's like a 2-year wait list. Even and especially like if you're not in the United States, like in other places where they do cover it, it's like you have to wait for years to get a diagnosis, to even get like an appointment.
Yeah. And if you think about it, if you're going to go through all that trouble, you probably kind of already know you're autistic to begin with. You're not going to seek that diagnosis unless you're pretty sure already. So it kind of feels like we're sort of on our own.
Nobody like just obsesses over it for fun and like tries to learn everything that they can about it and like dives into their childhood and like asks their family members. Like you don't do all of that just because like you are like interested. You do it because like your whole life you've been like, wait a second, like there is something and now I know what it is. Now I'm getting to the bottom of it now.
Yeah. And really, it really is true that the community is very accepting of self-diagnosis. When I tell other people other autistic people I'm autistic, they don't for a second think, I can't tell if you're. They can usually kind of instantly tell, and it's totally fine. Mm-hmm.
I was talking to my sister on the phone yesterday. Actually, I was telling her. She asked what I'm doing today, and I was like, I'm going to record my podcast with my friend Jay. And she was like, I was watching your podcast, and he's definitely autistic. How did he not know? And I was saying, there's like some other people in our friend group who had said like, when I met him, I thought he was probably autistic. But that's the kind of thing, like, if somebody doesn't know, you don't just like say it. But
yeah, it's so funny when I told a few people I was autistic, they would tell me, the first time I met you, I thought you were autistic. Mm-hmm. And no one ever really told me. And there's still plenty of people that don't believe I'm autistic. And so, that's all part of the imposter syndrome, the other people not believing you. It's all part of it. Every autistic person goes through this. And it comes down to the fact that most people don't really understand autism. So you kind of have to give people a whole TED Talk about autism for them to really understand.
Mm-hmm. Most people have like an image in their mind of like a stereotype of autism.
Yeah. And so the last con I'll mention with being diagnosed is it can lead to loss of opportunities. I heard that it can make it hard to adopt a child. It's basically like you're telling the government that you have some deficiency, and it's probably not that big of a deal, but
if you get into a custody battle at any point, they can use that against you.
Yeah.
If a big portion of people who are trans are autistic, and they're like starting to make laws in Missouri. They made a law that if you're diagnosed with autism in the last 3 years, that like if that diagnosis wasn't like taken care of and now you're not autistic anymore, which doesn't happen, then you can't do any kind of medical transitioning.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of like you're very publicly letting the government know that something's up with you, and I would just assume not be on some list like that.
Yeah. And then there's also certain countries that don't let you immigrate there if you're diagnosed with autism.
I've heard that.
Too.
Yeah, like New Zealand, something like that. Cool, and let's talk about disclosure. Disclosure, I just mean like when you tell other people that you're autistic. So I try to tell basically most people. I put a post on Facebook, and I told my bosses. And you might wonder why would you disclose to people? I'll mention that you don't have to disclose at all. The whole point of realizing you're autistic is for you, and it's up to you who you disclose to. The reason I disclosed to my bosses was because I didn't like them calling me on the phone or just like confronting me about stuff during work. I told them, let's handle everything through email. Whenever you got a question for me, text me, email. I'm great through text. Basically, autistic people often have a preferred communication.
I feel like it's never something that I would like meet somebody and be like, hi, I'm Morgan, and just so you know, I'm autistic. But it is something where once I've like known somebody, at least for like, even if it's a client at work sometimes, it'll be like not the first thing I say when I've met them, because I don't want that to be their entire like first impression of me, what they already think autism is. But I want them to like get to know me a little bit, and then when it comes up in like what I'm doing or like as a why for something, then that's when I bring it up. I'll be like, just so you know, like I might do this because I'm autistic, and I might interrupt you, or I might go on talking about this one, Taylor Swift, for the entire time I'm doing your hair. So like, tell me if that's bothering you, or,
yes,
things like that where it comes up, then I'm comfortable telling people that, but I don't like make it like an immediate thing, like part of my introduction.
Yeah. So some people wonder why tell people autism? And I've heard it explained that autism is an explanation. It's not an excuse. It's not a label. It's an explanation. So, and it needs to be explained sometimes. So a big thing for me is I'll tell the other person to turn the music down, and it can almost come off as I'm trying to be controlling, and it's really that my hearing is really sensitive. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be explained in various circumstances.
People will also like ask me all the time if I'm okay, because I'm like almost always stimming, and when I'm stimming, it looks like I'm really anxious about something, and people will be like, are you sure you're okay? And I'm like, yeah, like I'm doing it because I'm okay. I'm doing it because I feel comfortable enough to like just let my body do that.
Yes.
I'm okay.
And I think a lot of people aren't so sure what sort of responses they'll get when they disclose. So tell me, what's your experience been like when you tell people that you're autistic?
I mean, sometimes people like people who don't know much about autism, and the thing about people who like don't know much about it is that the only people that they know are autistic are people who like they need to disclose it, like like they have like a cousin who's nonverbal, and like that they obviously have to disclose that to everybody because they need an explanation to why their family member is nonverbal. And so that's what they have the idea of in their head, is that person. But they probably know like at least 10 other people who are also autistic, but it never really came up, or like so they don't have that person as the image of autism in their mind because they're not thinking of that person as autistic, but they're thinking of the person who's like very evidently autistic as autistic. So those people who have that image in their mind, they'll usually be like, oh, well, I mean, I know somebody, like I have somebody in my family who's autistic, like really autistic, and like they're severely autistic. Like they'll say that. And it's like, well, it's not really so much about severity, then it's about all these different categories. And then I go into explaining it, and then I explain how these certain traits have affected me through my entire life. And then they'll like start to get it. But then the people who already know what autism is and know a lot of people who are autistic and have already seen it presented in different ways, when I tell them, they're like, oh, totally. They're like, yeah, I could tell already. Like they would probably like already just be able to tell because they're like, oh yeah, I see you stimming, and I see like the pattern of your conversation and stuff like that.
Yes.
Or I see you not making eye contact with me, or like things like that are like that stick out to them.
Yeah. Yeah, for the people that understand it, it's very, very easy. And a lot of young people understand it. If it's the people that think that autism is only the extreme thing, you can tell them, have you ever heard the word spectrum tied into autism? They're like, yeah, I think I have heard autism spectrum. And then you say, yeah, it's different for different people. And yeah, you can throw out like some crazy trait you have. Like I'll say, I was nonverbal at 3. And then they'll go, okay, that seems like an autism thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so my experience disclosing has been very good. Like, everybody I tell, it's been pretty simple. The only people it's been difficult with is my family, and I think a lot of autistic people, it's a little bit complicated with the family because for one thing, it's there's a stigma around autism. It's like you're saying that there's a bad thing going on in the family or with yourself, and they're like, oh, you're doing well. And then you start telling them the traits, and then they're like, oh, these are all, if you tell it to your parents are like, oh, these are all my traits.
Yeah.
And so now it's implying that they're autistic, and so it starts being a complicated thing in the family.
Yeah. For me, it's kind of like it's the opposite just with my parents, where with my parents, I was really nervous to tell them and talk to them about it. So my dad, I was like, there's no way I'm talking to my dad about this, because literally all my dad does is like joke with me, and he's gonna just probably make fun of me. So I told my mom, and then and she was like, that makes a lot of sense. And she also felt very like sorry and very like guilty that she didn't do more when I was a kid. But I think that my mom also is realizing now that she's autistic, and the reason she didn't do more when I was a kid is because she thought all the things that I was doing were normal because she had been doing those things too. And then when I told her don't tell my dad, then she told me your dad was diagnosed when he was 12 as being on the autism spectrum, so he's not going to make fun of you. But so yeah, it's more like, and my parents are young parents, so they're both like only just now like in their 40s, and it's my grandparents more that I feel like talking to them about it, like, and my grandma could probably even be autistic, but she's also the kind of person that has like more strict ideas and views of things in her mind, that she'd be like, oh no, you're not autistic, I've met children who are autistic and you're not.
I wanted to say part of autism can involve rigidity in thinking, mm-hmm. black and white thinking, and being really rigid in your beliefs. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when you're talking to those family members, they'll have this rigid outlook, and it can be hard to change the mind of other autistic people, basically.
And that, like, as somebody who's autistic, taking assessments and tests can, like, that affects that a lot too, where you're like, doesn't make eye contact. Well, like, I make eye contact sometimes, so like that I'm not going to put that. Or like you take every question as like exactly what it means and exactly what it's saying, instead of like really looking at how it affects you and how you do these things differently than other people.
Yeah. So basically, the point is that with disclosure, it's up to you how much you disclose. You don't have to disclose to the family members that are set in their ways or whatever. But basically, it'll be mostly easy for most people, but you have to be careful talking with the family. So let's talk about unmasking. The basic idea of masking is that autistic people have developed a sort of persona to get by, to seem normal. And once you realize you're autistic, you're left with this kind of conundrum of who am I really? How should I be acting? And how can I unmask? Because it's not something you very consciously do. So
it's different personas with different people too.
Yeah.
You're constantly trying to figure out like which parts are really me and which are parts that I'm being because I'm around these people that I picked that up from being with them, and I did that because it looked normal to them, but then around these other people I don't do that, so that must not really be me. And like it's so hard to tell like what things are actually you and what things are part of your mask.
Yeah, different people bring out different aspects of ourselves. So do you have any basic advice on how to unmask?
I think one thing is like my whole life, if I would catch myself unmasking a little bit, then I would be like, stop doing that. Like if I caught myself stimming or caught myself rocking back and forth, then I would be like, oh, like don't do that. That looks weird. So the first thing I think for me was just like starting to, when I catch myself doing things, to not stop, to just let myself stim. Or if I catch myself going on about a thing that I realize maybe somebody doesn't want to hear me talk about for so long, then I will, like, instead of just being like apologetic for it, then like have an explanation for it. And things like that to start out.
Yeah, the advice I've heard is to not be too caught up in what's the real me, and to instead think about how would I like to be. And I think that we can always kind of feel inside ourselves when we're doing things that we're aligned with, and when we're doing things just to please other people. A lot of masking comes from wanting to please other people. And so I think just checking in with yourself and just always trying to be authentic. Like stop doing things that make you feel inauthentic and like you're giving your power away.
Mm-hmm. 'Cause it's not really about like who you are and how you're being perceived. It's about how you feel. And if you're doing something or being some way that makes you feel bad or feel like you're holding yourself back, then stop doing those things. And if you're doing something that helps you feel good and you're not hurting anybody else, then keep doing that thing.
Yes. Yeah, and some of it has to do with what you said about who you're with. So another tip I've heard is to try unmasking with one person, like your closest friend, and then try to kind of extend it. And that's why it can also help to have other neurodivergent friends that kind of can understand you.
Mm-hmm. It's really easy for me to unmask with Logan because he's also autistic and he's also unmasking with me, and it makes everything not be like embarrassing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it does make a difference who you're unmasking around. So yeah, I guess my sort of final call to action would be, if you think you're autistic, keep learning and go ahead and meet other autistic people, because that will help you understand yourself from kind of another perspective. You'll meet other people with face blindness that tiptoe walk.
You see how much you have in common.
Yeah.
It's really validating.
Yeah, there are so many traits. There's so many possible autistic traits out there, and then you realize that someone is doing that thing, and you're like, oh, you do that too? That's an autism thing, and it helps you connect the dots. And just basically, it might seem like there's not so many autistic people out there, but they are out there, and when you start disclosing and start being open about it, they start disclosing to you, and you realize that these people are everywhere.
Yeah, I was so nervous at first to bring it up with clients ever, because I thought like, oh, if they think, I used to think like kind of an ableist view of like, if I tell a client that I'm doing, like when I'm doing their hair, if I tell them that I'm autistic, they're going to lose trust in me and think that I'm not capable of doing what they want or understanding what they want. And I was like just so scared to even bring it up, because I thought that it would affect like their trust in me. But now that I'm bringing it up, so many people are like, oh yeah, my kid, like I've been suspecting forever about my kid, or my husband. I totally think that my husband is autistic and he's never been diagnosed, but like, and I never want to bring it up. And then it like opens this door for us to talk about it, because it turns out that there are so many people that either suspect it for them or somebody else in their family or in their lives, that they like don't know anything about it. And like, it ends up being a really good conversation where like they learn a lot, and I just learned that there's so many people out there like us.
Yes. Yeah, at worst, they won't understand or not care. And at best, they're going to say, yo, I'm autistic too. And then you have so much to bond over. Or as you said, so many people are connected to other autistic people. When we started this podcast, we were saying the official numbers were 1 in 44 people. Now the numbers are 1 in 34 children these days are diagnosed with autism, meaning it's about 3%. So yeah, this autism is more common than you'd think, and it's not a bad thing, and you can discuss it with other people, or you can handle it any way you'd like.
Mm-hmm.
All right, good stuff.